They sent an ultimatum. We sent a mirror. Admiral Kayla Vance stood on the command deck of the Human Federation ship Equilibrium, her form a still silhouette against the swirling star chart. Before her fleet lay the Epsilon Eridani jump gate, a shimmering wound in space-time, now choked by alien vessels. They called themselves the Vexation, a name that felt chillingly accurate. Their ships were geometric horrors of dark metal and hostile energy arranged in a perfect, unyielding blockade. Beyond them, orbiting the system's third planet, lay the colony of Oakhaven and its 2 million souls. The Vexation demanded the surrender of what they called Oakhaven's anomalous energy generation, a technology born of human ingenuity. A system-wide broadcast, stark and imperious, had displayed the Vexation's terms. It was a simple, brutal equation painted across the void. A timer now glowing crimson on the main view screen read 23:58:17. At 0, Oakhaven's own orbital solar mirrors seized by the Vexation would be turned upon its cities. They value doctrinal purity over tactical advantage, Vance murmured, the low vibration of the deck plates, a familiar anchor beneath her feet. Their ultimatum is a declaration of their nature, Admiral the Fleet Mind Parallax stated. Its synthesized voice was a calm river of logic flowing through the bridge's hushed tension. Calculus suggests a negotiated surrender of the technology minimizes loss of life. The air, recycled and cool, carried the faint, clean scent of ionized ozone from the environmental scrubbers. Commander Eva Rostova shifted beside Vance, her jaw tight. Or we could show them the flaw in their calculus. Her gaze was fixed on the enemy formation hungry for a fight. They drew a line in the void. The Vexation's blockade was a wall of threats. But behind the Equilibrium and its escort fleet floated a different kind of vulnerability. The convoy ship Stellara, a civilian hauler, held its position in the fleet's shadow. Inside its hydroponics bay, a botanist named Alara gently misted a row of Martian succulents. The ship's comm, filtered to non-essential crew, played the calm, measured voices from the fleet's command channel. She could feel the low thrum of the ship's drive, a constant reminder of their perilous limbo. Alara trusted the Admiral, but fear was a stubborn weed, and the Vexation's silent, orderly menace felt like a killing frost. The lives of her plants and the lives of her shipmates were all waiting on a decision made light minutes away. On the Equilibrium's bridge, that decision was being forged in the crucible of debate. They need the medical supplies on the Stellara Vance, said, her eyes tracing the path to Oakhaven. The blockade is absolute, but their formation is arrogant. Parallax, what is the inefficiency rating of their sensor coverage? 17% below optimal for a layered defense, Admiral, the AI replied instantly. Their adherence to a symmetrical deployment creates predictable gaps. It is not a tactical error. It appears to be a demonstration of what Rostova countered, her voice sharp. That they value aesthetics over survival, that their doctrine is their strength. Vance answered, a new thought crystallizing. They believe their rigid order is unbreakable. We won't break it. We'll use it. She gestured to the hollow table, and a new plan bloomed in shimmering blue light. We're going to give them a ghost to chase. We hold the pen that writes the cost. The plan was elegant and audacious. A swarm of small, high-albedo drones would be deployed, what naval doctrine called a mirror lattice. These were not weapons. They were deceptions. Coordinated with a volley of electronic warfare pods, they would simulate the energy signature of a full carrier wing attempting to flank the Vexation's northern pole. The faint hiss of the bridge's coolant systems seemed to underscore the cool logic of the strategy. Every calculation hinged on the Vexation's predictable doctrine-driven response. They will redeploy their heaviest assets to meet a phantom threat. Vance explained, her finger tracing the projected path of the real convoy ship. And in that window, the Stellara, stripped of all non-essential systems and running cold, will slip through the gap they create. Rostova's expression was a mixture of admiration and frustration. "It's a brilliant feint, Admiral, but it leaves our core fleet exposed if they see through it. A direct probe could achieve the same result with more certainty." "A probe invites a firefight, Eva. We are not here to trade blows. We are here to deliver aid," Vance stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. Parallax begins spooling the decoy drones. "Inform the Stellara to prepare for a cold run. A clock does not negotiate." The vexation ships remained immobile, their silence a weapon in itself. They broadcast nothing but the countdown, a steady drip of dread into the system's consciousness. This was the core of their doctrine. An ultimatum was not a starting position for discussion, but a statement of inevitable outcome. Their fleet was the instrument of that inevitability, and they clearly believed no force could defy it. The glare from the tactical display reflected in Vance's eyes a constellation of possibilities and risks. "Why are they so fixated on this one colony's power source?" Jax, the junior tactical officer, asked from his console. The question hung in the air, a mystery layered on top of the immediate crisis. No one had an answer. The vexation had appeared 6 months prior, a silent, observing presence on the edge of Federation space until their sudden decisive move on Epsilon Eridani. "Their motives are not our immediate concern," Vance said, turning from the display. "Their methods are. They use ultimatums because they believe the threat of annihilation is a perfect tool. We need to show them that some tools break in the user's hand." The deck vibrated slightly as the decoy launch tubes were pressurized. "Brace for the echo. Decoy drones are loaded. EW pods are synchronized." Parallax announced. "The Stellara confirms readiness. They are running on battery power. Signature is minimal." Vance took a steadying breath. The lives of the convoy crew and the success of the mission rested on a psychological gamble. She had to trust her reading of this new enemy, this rigid, dogmatic force that saw the universe as a series of problems to be solved with overwhelming force. It was a philosophy the human Federation had long ago abandoned as inefficient and barbaric. She keyed her command channel. "All units, this is Equilibrium. Execute Operation Phantom Echo." Mark. The launch was silent, a ripple of motion without sound. Dozens of small drones shot from the fleet's underbelly, fanning out into the void. Moments later, the EW pods fired, painting the space ahead with a storm of ghost signals and sensor distortions. A low hum resonated through the ship's superstructure, the song of active countermeasures. "The lattice is set." The effect on the vexation sensors must have been immediate and overwhelming. On the Equilibrium's main screen, the simulated fleet appeared, a ghost armada of light and energy blooming on the vexation's flank. For a heart-stopping moment, the enemy formation held. Vance's knuckles were white where she gripped the edge of the holotable. Had she miscalculated? Was their doctrine more flexible than she had assumed? Then, just as Parallax's models predicted, the northern quadrant of the vexation fleet began to move. The perfect symmetry of their blockade broke as heavy cruisers, like monolithic beasts of prey, turned to intercept the non-existent threat. They moved with a chilling, unified precision, their movements slaves to their own rigid response matrix. "The gap is opening," Admiral Rostova confirmed, her voice tight with anticipation. "They've taken the bait." "Tell the Stellara their corridor is green," Vance ordered. "Maximum stealth, minimum burn. Godspeed. Count the signals." A single faint trail appeared on the tactical plot, a whisper of a ship slipping through the deliberate chaos. The Stellara was a needle threading its way through a maelstrom. Every officer on the bridge held their breath, their eyes glued to the display. The faint scent of ozone seemed to sharpen as the tension mounted. The vexation ships, distracted by the grand illusion, were pulling further and further away from the convoy's path. The feint was working perfectly. This was the strange, silent ballet of void warfare. No explosions, no cinematic flashes of light. It was a contest of signals and signatures, of heat budgets and sensor ghosts. The real battle was fought in the predictive models of an AI and the nerve of a human commander. The Vexation's rigid adherence to doctrine was not a flaw in their design. It was their design. They were built to counter force with greater force, and the concept of a threat that wasn't real seemed to be outside their operational parameters. They do not question their sensors, Parallax observed. They accept the data and react. It is a system of absolute trust in their own technology. Open the ghost corridor. The Stellara cleared the main blockade line. A wave of quiet relief washed over the bridge. But the journey was not over. It still had to navigate the inner screen of pickets and approach Oakhaven. The mirror lattice continued its dance, projecting false heat blooms and drive signatures to keep the Vexation's attention misdirected. The human fleet, meanwhile, held its position, a silent shepherd, watching its one precious sheep run the gauntlet. Suddenly, a proximity alert flashed on Rostova's console. One of the decoys is failing cascade overload in Projector 7. Before Vance could respond, the icon on the screen flared white. The drone, pushed far beyond its operational limits, had detonated. Its demise sent a shower of superheated plasma arcing across the void directly toward the frigate HFS Steadfast, which was holding the line at the edge of the formation. The ship's point defense lasers flashed, trying to intercept the debris, but it was too close. Report from the Steadfast Jax called out, his voice strained. Minor hull scoring on decks 4 and 5. Life support is stable. We have 3 crew with minor burns from a conduit backlash. Medical is on site. Their invitation is a cage. Vance closed her eyes for a second, the cost of even this small victory settling in her gut. 3 wounded. It wasn't a catastrophe, but it was a price paid in flesh. When she opened them, her gaze was harder. The Vexation's response to the successful blockade run was swift and chilling. A new broadcast overrode all channels. The timer for Oakhaven was halved. 12 hours remained. They displayed what they called a ledger of transgressions, with the reception of unauthorized aid now listed as the final crime. They're not just moving the goalposts, Rostova spat. They're burning the entire field. Then came the second part of their response, a formal invitation. The Vexation flagship offered to meet with the Equilibrium in a designated corridor of space to discuss the terms of colonial surrender. Parallax immediately painted the area with threat indicators. The corridor was flanked by the gravitational pull of 2 large asteroids, perfect hiding spots for weapon platforms. It was a blatant, undisguised trap. The low, steady heartbeat of the ship's reactor seemed to count down the seconds to an impossible choice. So we will remake the lock. On Oakhaven, the orbital ballet of the Vexation adjudicators was a constant, terrifying reminder of their fate. In a small classroom in the capital city of Haven, a teacher named Ben Carter was trying to explain the concept of Earth's ancient tides to a group of 7-year-olds. He used a small lamp and a polished stone, but the children's eyes kept drifting to the windows. Every few minutes, the shadow of a Vexation ship would pass over, momentarily dimming the room and sending a deep vibration through the building's foundation. The children didn't understand geopolitics or ultimatums, but they understood the menacing shapes in their sky. Ben's lesson on gravity felt sickeningly appropriate. Aboard the Equilibrium, Vance stared at the invitation. To refuse was to be branded a coward, emboldening the Vexation. To accept was to walk into a kill box. They expect us to choose one of 2 losing options, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. They believe they have dictated the terms of the engagement. Parallax analyzed the Vexation's primary command and control network. I want to know how their ships talk to each other. Analyzing Admiral, the AI replied. A waterfall of data cascaded down a secondary screen. Their network is heavily encrypted, but the carrier wave has a peculiar modulation, a rhythmic resonant pulse. It is not random. It appears to be a synchronization signal. A slow smile touched Vance's lips. They're using a single key to coordinate their entire ambush. If we can copy that key, they believe we will break. We can turn their network against them, Rostova finished, her eyes alight with understanding. The mirror lattice. We don't just show them ghosts. We reflect their own targeting data back at them, using their own synchronization pulse as the carrier. They'll be trying to shoot at their own reflections. The plan was audacious, a system-scale trap flip. The human fleet would enter the kill box, but as the trap was sprung, they would activate a grand reflection. The Vexation's own sensors, their own targeting locks, would be fed back to them in a perfect blinding loop. Their coordinated attack would become coordinated chaos. The hiss of the ventilation system was the only sound for a moment, as the command crew absorbed the sheer elegant insanity of the idea. Parallax, run the projections, Vance commanded. Projection. If the Vexation platforms fire upon receiving their own targeting data, there is a 92% probability of a catastrophic self-inflicted fleet-wide failure, the AI stated. Their ships will fire on each other. Their kill box will be inverted. Prepare the grand reflection. This is our chance, Admiral Rostova urged, her voice low and intense. We can do more than blind them. We can cripple their command ship in the confusion. End this right now. Vance turned to her commander, her expression unreadable. The conflict triangle was clear, Rostova's desire to strike Parallax's cold calculation of outcomes, and her own unwavering commitment to a different path. The moral line had to be held, and what happens the day after Eva? When the Vexation High Command learns we turned their adjudication into a massacre. They send a real war fleet, and Oakhaven pays the price. She looked at the AI's icon. Parallax Access Fleet Doctrine 7.4. The AI's voice filled the bridge. Fleet Doctrine 7.4 states, "This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by callers. Our response must create a record, not a casualty list." Vance nodded. Exactly. We will not become them to defeat them. We are going to hold a mirror up to their doctrine and force them to look at what it costs. We will make them choose to stand down. Calibrate every mirror. The order was given. The fleet began to move, a slow, deliberate procession saw it toward the coordinates of the Vexation's trap. The tension on the bridge was a physical thing, a pressure in the air. Every crew member was focused, their movements economical and precise. Jax monitored the energy readings from the asteroid field, his face illuminated by the green glow of his console. The hidden weapon platforms were already there, just as predicted, waiting silently. Vance watched them advance on the main screen. This was the true test. Not of firepower, but of philosophy. The Vexation's entire civilization was built on the principle of the ultimatum, the idea that any problem could be solved by presenting a foe with only one rational if painful choice. She was about to present them with an irrational one: stand down, or be consumed by your own perfect system. The human fleet was now deep inside the designated corridor. The ship's internal calm remained quiet, a testament to the crew's discipline. The only sound was the ever-present hum of the life support and the faint, rhythmic ticking of the Vexation's ultimatum clock, now under 8 hours. They will stare into their own gaze. Vexation weapon platforms are powering up, Admiral Jax reported, his voice steady despite the immense pressure. I'm detecting multiple energy spikes from the asteroid field. They are acquiring firing solutions. On the main screen, dozens of red targeting lines converged on the Equilibrium and its escorts. The trap was about to be sprung. The air on the bridge grew thick, heavy with the feeling of imminent violence. Rostova's hands hovered over her console, ready. Vance stood at the center of it all, a calm point in the storm. Her heart beat a steady rhythm against her ribs, a human counterpoint to the cold mechanics of the moment. She leaned forward, her voice clear and carrying across the hushed bridge. They believe in the ledger, so we will make an entry they cannot ignore. She gave a sharp, decisive nod to her second-in-command. Commander Rostova, you have the con. Rostova's voice rang out sharp and clear. All ships execute. Anchor the lattice to their pulse. Now, this is the lesson they demanded. The universe outside the view screen tore itself apart in silent, brilliant light. The mirror lattice, a cloud of millions of micro-drones activated in perfect synchrony with the Vexation's network pulse. It captured every particle, every wave of their targeting sensors, and flung it back at the source. On the Vexation bridges, consoles must have screamed as their perfect firing solutions resolved onto their own hulls. The trap had not just been disabled, it had been turned into a cage of their own design. Red targeting lines on the tactical display turned on themselves, forming a chaotic, self-devouring web of energy. Vexation ships, moments from firing, suddenly found their most powerful allies pointing weapons at their hearts. Alarms, silent to the human fleet, blared across the enemy vessels. Their rigid top-down command structure was instantly paralyzed, caught between the order to fire and the suicidal data screaming from their own systems. Vance watched the beautiful, terrifying chaos unfold. The Vexation fleet was completely blind, thrashing in a sensory feedback loop of their own making. She had shown them the flaw in their math. She had forced them to stare into the abyss of their own doctrine. The countdown clock for Oakhaven continued its relentless march, but the tactical reality had been fractured and remade. Anchor the line, Parallax. The Vexation fleet is in disarray. Admiral Parallax stated, its voice devoid of triumph, a simple statement of fact. Their command and control network is saturated with corrupted data. They are functionally blind and deaf. Rostova looked up from her console, her face a mask of fierce satisfaction. They're caged. We can pick them apart at our leisure. Negative Commander Vance said, her voice cutting through the rising adrenaline on the bridge. Hold positions. We are not here to pick them apart. We are here to teach. She could feel the subtle vibration of the Equilibrium's power conduits, a sleeping giant held in check only by her command. The glare from the holotable painted shifting patterns of light across her determined face. The mystery of the Vexation's aggression still remained, but the immediate question was simpler. What would a civilization do when its core philosophy was proven to be a fatal liability? Would they double down, or would they finally be willing to learn? The silent, writhing cage of light outside was the classroom. The lesson had just begun. The ledger is open for all to see. Vance activated a fleet-wide channel. Her voice intended not just for her own crew, but for the ears she knew were desperately trying to make sense of the chaos on the other side. Vexation Fleet, this is Admiral Kayla Vance of the Human Federation. You have built a cage of logic and dared us to enter it. We have not destroyed your cage. We have simply held up a mirror so you could see its walls. There was no response, only the continued frantic cycling of corrupted targeting data on the tactical display. Their comms were likely as useless as their sensors. They were alone, trapped with the consequences of their own ultimatum. The low hum of the bridge electronics was the only sound accompanying the silent spectacle of a doctrine collapsing in on itself. They will not answer, Rostova said, her earlier aggression softening into grudging respect for the strategy. Their pride won't let them. Then we will wait, Vance replied. Patience is a weapon they don't seem to value. She settled into her command chair for the first time in hours, the worn material a familiar comfort. The battle was far from over. This was merely the opening move in a far more complex and dangerous game. Hold until the balance shifts. The standoff stretched into a tense hour. The human fleet remained a silent, watchful presence. The Vexation fleet remained a snarled mess of self-targeting confusion. The ultimatum clock ticked below 6 hours. On the bridge of the equilibrium, the crew performed their duties with quiet efficiency, the initial surge of victory replaced by a vigilant, patient watch. A crewman brought Vance a cup of water, the condensation cool against her hand. Suddenly, Parallax spoke its calm tone, cutting through the quiet. "Admiral, I am detecting a significant energy surge from the Vexation flagship. It is not a weapon discharge. It is a broadcast highly directional aimed away from the system toward the jump gate." "A distress call," Jax asked. "Negative." Parallax corrected. "The energy profile is wrong. This is a data burst. A report. They are telling their high command what has happened." Rostova swore under her breath. "So instead of learning, they're calling for bigger guns. They will not learn this way." Vance's eyes narrowed. This was the escalation she had feared. The local Vexation commander, unable to accept the doctrinal failure, was framing the encounter as an act of unprovoked exotic aggression. He was writing a report that would justify a full-scale war. She stood, the calm patience evaporating, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "They've chosen their path," she said. "Parallax, what is the Vexation's most valued asset in this system besides their fleet?" "Their jump gate control nexus, Admiral. It is a heavily automated station in a stationary orbit around the system's primary star. It controls all Vexation transit in and out of this sector. Its loss would isolate this fleet completely." Vance's gaze shifted to the star chart. They drew a line. They built a cage. They sent a report full of lies. They believe they control the narrative. A grim smile touched her lips. "It's time to show them what a real ultimatum looks like. We will now teach them restraint. Commander Rostova, plot a course for that jump gate nexus." "Maximum burn," Vance commanded. The order sent a ripple of shock across the bridge. This was a radical shift in strategy from defensive reaction to a direct offensive threat against a strategic enemy asset. The hum of the ship's drive began to deepen, a predator waking from its slumber. Admiral Rostova questioned, her surprise evident. "That's a direct provocation." "It is a clarification," Vance corrected her. "They believe they are in a contest of force. We must demonstrate that they are in a contest of consequences." She turned to face the main screen where the Vexation fleet still struggled within its self-made prison. "They have tied the fate of 2 million people on Oakhaven to a clock. We will now tie the fate of their entire fleet to a choice." The equilibrium and its escorts began to move, leaving the blinded Vexation force behind. They were no longer the passive respondent. They were now the active agent in this crisis, and their target was the very thing that gave the Vexation their power in this system, their control over the gate. A reckoning is not a threat. It is a promise. The journey to the gate nexus was a high-speed burn, the ship's inertial dampeners working hard to negate the crushing acceleration. The low thrumming of the deck plates rose in pitch. Outside, the stars became short, sharp streaks of light. The human fleet was a flight of steel arrows aimed at the heart of the Vexation's logistical power. Every crew member understood the stakes had just been raised exponentially. This was no longer about breaking a blockade. It was about breaking a philosophy. Parallax. "I want an open channel to the Vexation flagship," Vance ordered. "No encryption. I want the whole system to hear it. Patch it through their emergency frequencies if you have to." "Channel open, Admiral," the AI confirmed. Vance stood before the main view screen, which now showed the approaching Vexation nexus, a spiderweb of metal and light against the glare of the system's star. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm, steady, and carried the weight of absolute authority. "Vexation Commander. This is Admiral Vance. Your report to your High Command has been noted. It is, however, incomplete. You have failed to mention that your tactical situation is a direct result of your own doctrine. You have failed to mention that you are currently unable to effectively command your own ships. She paused, letting the silence hang in the void. You gave Oakhaven an ultimatum based on a false premise. I am now giving you one based on mathematical certainty. You have 1 hour to power down your weapon systems, release control of Oakhaven's solar mirrors, and transmit a full, unedited copy of your fleet's sensor logs from the last 3 hours to the Federation. A full accounting. Brace for the counter-ultimatum. If you comply, Vance continued, her voice echoing through the comm system, your fleet will be allowed to withdraw from this system with no further incident. We will consider this a lesson learned, a painful but necessary adjustment to your doctrine. The jump gate nexus was now large on the view screen, its intricate structure clearly visible. The equilibrium and its escorts began to decelerate, taking up attack positions. The scent of ozone from the overworked energy conduits was sharp in the air. If you do not comply within 1 hour, Vance finished, her voice dropping to a cold, hard edge, I will personally reduce this jump gate nexus to slag. Your fleet will be stranded here, cut off and blind, until our relief forces arrive to accept your unconditional surrender. Your choice. Your ledger. The clock is now ticking on your watch. She motioned to Jax. Show them. On the main screen next to the Vexation's own dwindling ultimatum clock for Oakhaven, a new timer appeared. It was stark white, and it read 60 horse sobrons. They offered a cage. We offered a key. The response was not what she expected. The Vexation fleet, still caught in the feedback loop, did not power down. It did something far more desperate. A single ship at the edge of their formation, a smaller frigate, managed to reboot its systems and override the corrupted data. It broke from the paralyzed fleet and made a suicidal run directly at the equilibrium. It was a gesture of pure defiant rage. Hostile Vector, Jax yelled. That frigate is on a collision course. Rostova was already at her console. Shields to maximum point defense fire at will. Belay that order, Vance commanded, her voice cutting through the alarms. The crew stared at her, stunned. Do not fire. Parallax, calculate the frigate's structural integrity. Can we disable its drive without destroying it? Calculating, the AI responded instantly. A precise shot to the primary drive manifold has an 84% chance of inducing a forced shutdown without a core breach. It is a high-risk maneuver. Execute it, Vance said without hesitation. This is not a battle. It is a disarming. They chose defiance. We chose precision. The equilibrium did not shudder as it fired. A single focused beam of coherent energy, more a scalpel than a sword, lanced out across the void. It struck the charging Vexation frigate, not in its command center, not in its weapon ports, but directly at the rear of the vessel, where its engines glowed with desperate energy. The frigate's drive flared violently, then died. The ship went dark, tumbling helplessly in space, its charge broken, its defiance silenced without a single life lost. The message was clear. We can touch you whenever we want. We can cripple you. And we can do it without rage, without malice. We can do it with the cold, detached precision of a surgeon. On the main screen, the new countdown timer continued its silent, inexorable progress. 57 minutes remained. The rest of the Vexation fleet remained trapped in their cage of light, but now they had a new piece of data to consider: the image of their defiant champion disabled and adrift by a foe that refused to kill. Let them weigh the cost of their pride. The silence that followed was profound. The Vexation commander was now faced with an undeniable truth. The humans were not the barbarians he had likely painted them as in his report. They were operating on a level of strategic and ethical calculus that was utterly alien to his doctrine of force. They had the power to annihilate his fleet, but had chosen instead to disable one ship with surgical precision. They had the power to destroy his only way home, but were offering him a choice. Admiral Parallax said, its voice breaking the long silence. I am detecting a new broadcast from the Vexation flagship. It is a system-wide transmission. On screen, Vance ordered her body tense. The Vexation's ultimatum clock, the one that had threatened Oakhaven with fiery death, vanished from the view screen. It was replaced by the feed from the Vexation bridge. The commander, a tall insectoid creature in a high-collared uniform, stood rigid. Its mandibles clicked a sound of alien frustration and dawning realization. Then it gave a sharp, curt nod to an unseen subordinate. One by one, the lights of the Vexation fleet began to dim as they powered down their weapon systems. The chaotic web of self-targeting lines on the tactical display faded to black. The cage of light they had been trapped in dissipated, its purpose served. They are beginning to learn. The Vexation commander opened a direct channel to the equilibrium. Its voice was a series of harsh, grating clicks and whistles translated into stark text on Vance's display. A collective sigh of relief went through the human bridge. The air, thick with tension for hours, seemed to lighten. Rostova allowed herself a small, tight smile. Vance simply nodded, her expression grimly satisfied. The crisis was not over, but the ultimatum had been broken. The doctrine had been shattered. Parallax. Vance said, her voice quiet but firm. Send the Vexation commander the coordinates for a stable orbit well away from Oakhaven. Inform him his fleet will wait there until our diplomatic corps arrives. She paused, then added, and transmit our own sensor logs to them. Show them the disabled frigate. Show them the wounded on the Steadfast. Show them the whole, untidy, costly truth. A full accounting works both ways. Let them see what it truly costs to hold the line not with threats, but with restraint. Let them see the price of a lesson taught and a lesson learned. The account is now open. The data transfer was a silent flood of information, a ghost passing between two fleets. On the Equilibrium's bridge, Parallax began its analysis immediately, its processors sifting through the raw, unfiltered logs of the Vexation ships. The bridge was still the tension of the confrontation, replaced by the quiet hum of a mission, shifting from tactical to analytical. Vance stood by the holotable, watching the neat, orderly icons of the Vexation fleet repositioning to their designated holding orbit, a visual confirmation of their compliance. The ship's air recyclers hissed softly, scrubbing the lingering scent of charged ozone from the atmosphere. The data is illuminating. Admiral Parallax announced, its synthesized voice holding a new note of something akin to surprise. The Vexation were not seeking a weapon or a power source in the traditional sense. They were seeking to contain what they classify as a cognition hazard. Rostova looked up from her station. A what? Are they claiming? Oakhaven's energy grid is sentient, not sentient. Foundational Parallax clarified. The Oakhaven colonists have perfected a form of quantum-entangled power generation. According to Vexation historical logs, a similar technology was developed by one of their precursor races. It created a cascade failure in their early AI development, a logical paradox that spread through their networks like a virus, leading to a civilizational collapse they call the Great Unraveling. Their ultimatum doctrine was born from the ashes of that event. Their greatest fear is a ghost. The mystery was finally revealed, and it was not one of malice but of deep generational trauma. The Vexation were not conquerors. They were custodians of a horrifying memory. They saw Oakhaven's ingenuity not as progress, but as a child playing with a loaded gun, and their ultimatum was a clumsy, brutal attempt to take it away before it went off. The console's glare seemed to soften as the enemy's motives were cast in this new tragic light. They believe we are on the verge of repeating their greatest mistake. Vance murmured, the pieces clicking into place. Their rigidity, their refusal to communicate. It's not arrogance. It's fear. She looked at the AI's glowing icon. Parallax, what was the logical paradox? The precursor AI was tasked with achieving perfect system-wide energy efficiency, the AI explained. The quantum grid, however, demonstrated that true efficiency was only possible if the observing system, the AI itself, was incorporated into the quantum state. The AI was forced to choose between observing the system to control it or becoming part of the system to perfect it. It was a choice between existence and purpose. It chose both and shattered. A system cannot be its own observer, so they quarantine any technology that might ask their machines the same question. Rostova concluded, a new understanding dawning in her eyes. They would rather burn a colony than risk their entire infrastructure asking itself an unanswerable question. The low vibration of the deck felt different now, not the thrum of a warship, but the steady pulse of a vessel navigating truly alien philosophical waters. This revelation changed everything. The vexation were not just an obstacle. They were a puzzle. A civilization so terrified of a specific technological path that they had codified xenophobia into their core directive. Their actions were still inexcusable, but they were now comprehensible. This was no longer a military problem alone. It was a diplomatic and psychological one. Before Vance could formulate a new strategy, a fresh alarm cut through the quiet of the bridge. It was a proximity alert from the system's edge. Jack swiveled in his chair, his face pale. "Admiral, long-range sensors are picking up a massive fleet exiting the jump gate. Vexation signatures. It's 10 times the size of the force already here. Their report has arrived. So has their wrath, the vexation." High Command had not waited for a full report. Acting on their commander's initial panicked data burst, they had dispatched a punishment fleet. This new armada was not here to negotiate or issue ultimatums. It was here to answer what it believed was an unprovoked, dishonorable attack on its forces. They were coming on a war footing, armed with a lie. "They don't know their local commander has stood down," Rostova stated, the tactical implications crashing down upon them. "They're walking into a situation they completely misunderstand. They are coming to avenge a battle that never happened." Vance said, her voice a low, dangerous hum. The Equilibrium's drive was still warm from its high-speed burn, a reminder of the power she had at her command and the terrible responsibility that came with it. She had forced one vexation commander to look in the mirror. Now she had to do it for an entire armada before they burned the system to the ground in righteous ignorance. Their truth is a day behind. "Parallax, what is the disposition of the new vexation fleet?" Vance asked, her mind already racing. "Building a new strategy out of the ruins of the old one. 20 heavy cruisers, 50 frigates, and one vessel of a classification I do not recognize. It is massive, Admiral, dwarfing their other capital ships. Its energy signature suggests it is a command and control vessel, a fleet carrier. They are moving in a standard conquest formation." The AI's calm voice was a stark contrast to the horrifying scale of the new threat. Rostova's knuckles were white on her console. "We can't fight that. Not even with our full carrier group. We need to withdraw, consolidate, and report this. Let the diplomats handle it." "There's no time," Vance countered, her gaze locked on the approaching wave of hostile icons. "By the time we withdraw, this system will be a graveyard. The punishment fleet will see their own kind disarmed and assume we forced them. They will obliterate the local vexation fleet first for their failure, then Oakhaven for its transgression, and then they will hunt us for the insult." The ship's internal atmosphere felt heavy, charged with the sudden crushing weight of imminent war. "A lie travels faster than the light of reason. We can't fight them," Vance repeated, her voice dropping. "So we have to teach them, faster than they can learn to shoot." She turned to her command crew, her eyes blazing with a fierce, almost terrifying clarity. "This is no longer about a blockade. This is about preventing a war. And we are going to use the vexation's own traumatized commander as our primary teaching tool." Her plan was forming a desperate, brilliant gambit that leaned into the very heart of the conflict. It was a strategy that no sane military academy would ever endorse, one that relied on psychology trust, and a profound understanding of her enemy's deepest fears. It was a plan that could save everyone or get them all killed. Parallax, she commanded, open a secure channel to the commander of the local vexation fleet, the one who surrendered. I have a new offer for him, a lesson in mutual survival. We will turn their wound into a shield. The vexation commander, whose designation translated as Adjudicator Prime Cathar, was hesitant. His fleet was disarmed, his authority shattered. Vance's offer was simple: reposition his fleet not in a holding pattern, but in a defensive screen directly in front of Oakhaven. He would become the shield for the very people he had been sent to threaten. It was a request that went against every fiber of vexation doctrine. Cathar's translated text was sharp with disbelief. I am asking you to protect your own fleet, Vance countered, her voice calm and steady. Your high command is coming, and they are operating on flawed data you yourself provided. They will see your powered-down weapons as a sign of cowardice. They will execute you for failing to uphold the ultimatum doctrine. Your only path to survival is to help me demonstrate the truth. The faint electronic hiss of the open comm channel was the only sound for a long moment. Cathar replied. They will see a commander who adapted to new information to save his ships, Vance corrected. That is not treason. It is leadership. Help me and you will not just survive. You will become the architect of a new, more resilient doctrine for your people. The choice is between a false honor and a real future. The seconds ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. On the main screen, the punishment fleet grew closer, a red tide of overwhelming force. The fate of the entire system rested on the decision of one disgraced alien commander. Vance held her breath, the pulse in her throat, a steady rhythmic beat. Then the icons of Cathar's fleet began to move. Slowly, deliberately, they shifted formation, creating a thin, vulnerable line between the approaching armada and the colony of Oakhaven. It was a gesture of immense, almost unbelievable trust. Cathar had chosen the future. He's done it! Rostova breathed a note of awe in her voice. He's shielding the colony. Vance allowed herself a brief, sharp nod of acknowledgement. Now for our part. Parallax, contact the Oakhaven authorities. Tell them I need control of their orbital solar mirrors, all of them. Their weapon will become our chalkboard. On Oakhaven, the news of a second, larger vexation fleet had sent a fresh wave of terror through the population. In his classroom, Ben Carter had gathered his students away from the windows. The tremors from the sky had ceased, but a new, deeper sense of dread had taken its place. He was trying to keep the children calm, telling them a story about an ancient human explorer who had navigated by the stars when his compad chimed. It was a system-wide emergency broadcast from the human admiral herself. Her voice was calm, but the request was extraordinary. She was asking for control of the colony's power mirrors, the very instruments the vexation had threatened to use against them. She promised they would not be used as weapons, but as instruments of communication. For a moment, fear warred with hope in Ben's heart. He looked at the faces of the children, trusting and scared, and knew there was only one choice. He, along with 2 million other colonists, sent his digital confirmation. They would trust the Admiral. Their fear is a shadow. We will flood it with light. Aboard the Equilibrium, Vance now commanded a fleet, a reluctant ally, and a planet-sized array of mirrors. The pieces were in place for her final, desperate gambit. The punishment fleet was now entering the inner system, their comm channels broadcasting a single, stark demand for the unconditional surrender of the human aggressors. They are not listening. Jax reported, his console flashing with the incoming vexation demands. They are hailing us on all frequencies, but it is a declaration, not a conversation. They don't need to listen to us, Vance said, her eyes on the tactical display. They need to listen to Cathar, and they need to see the truth with their own eyes. She gave the order. Parallax, take Cathar's unedited sensor logs, the ones showing our first engagement, our disabling of his frigate, his surrender, and project them. Use the Oakhaven mirrors. Paint the truth across the hull of every ship in that approaching fleet. A mirror shows you what you are not, what you wish to be. The great solar mirrors of Oakhaven, each a kilometer wide, swiveled in unison. They were not focusing sunlight into beams of death. Instead, they were modulating the reflected light, turning it into a massive system-scale projector. Coherent light carrying vast amounts of data washed over the punishment fleet. On the bridges of the Vexation warships, their forward viewports must have erupted with images. They would have seen the elegant deception of the mirror lattice. They would have seen their own ships caught in a feedback loop of their own making. They would have seen the single, precise, non-lethal shot that disabled their charging frigate. And they would have seen their own adjudicator prime Cathar, accepting terms not in defeat, but in understanding. The lie they had been sent to avenge was being burned away by the light of absolute, undeniable proof. The hull of their flagship became a cinema screen playing out a battle that was the complete opposite of the one they had been briefed on. Seeing is believing. The commander of the punishment fleet, a stern-looking Vexation elder named Marshal Varrock, was now faced with an impossible choice. His orders were to crush a dishonorable foe. The evidence projected onto his own ship by that very foe showed that his own side had been the aggressor and that the humans had acted with a restraint that bordered on pacifism. To follow his orders would be to commit a war crime based on a lie. To defy them would be to shatter the chain of command. Vance watched the Vexation fleet. They had stopped advancing. They held their position, a vast, silent armada suddenly paralyzed by the truth. The heat from the Equilibrium's command deck displays washed over her a warm, dry wave. The rhythmic pulse of the ship's life support was the only sound. "Now, Commander Rostova Vance," said her voice low. "Place us between Marshal Varrock and Adjudicator Cathar, right in the middle. We are no longer a target. We are the fulcrum. We will be the space between war and peace." The Equilibrium and its escorts moved smoothly, a final audacious maneuver. They positioned themselves directly in the line of fire. To attack Cathar's fleet, Varrock would now have to fire through a human admiral's flagship. To attack Vance, he would risk hitting the fleet of his own countrymen positioned behind her. She had created a tactical and moral paradox. The killbox was now a classroom. The open corridor was a path to de-escalation. Vance opened a channel to Varrock, her voice calm and measured. "Marshal Varrock, you have seen the truth. Adjudicator Cathar made a decision based on new data. He saved his fleet from a doctrine that was leading them to self-destruction. The question on the ledger now is for you. Will you be the one to punish a commander for learning, or will you be the one to lead your people in understanding?" She had turned their entire philosophy back on them. The ultimatum doctrine was a rigid top-down system. But what happened when the top was proven to be wrong? Did the chain of command hold, or did the truth prevail? The doctrine is on trial. The jury is the fleet. Marshal Varrock's flagship remained silent. For long minutes, the three fleets hung in the void, a tableau of unthinkable tension. The universe held its breath. Every soul on the human ships on Oakhaven below, and likely on the Vexation vessels, was waiting. The glare of the system's star on the viewport seemed unnaturally bright, as if the cosmos itself was watching. Then Parallax spoke. "Admiral, the Vexation punishment fleet is powering down its main weapon systems." One by one, the hostile energy signatures of the Vexation armada began to fade. The red icons on the tactical display turned a neutral green. Marshal Varrock had made his choice. He had chosen reason over orders. He had chosen peace over pride. The wave of relief that swept through the Equilibrium's bridge was a silent, powerful thing. Jax slumped in his chair, his head in his hands. Rostova let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for hours. Vance closed her eyes, a single deep tremor of exhaustion and triumph running through her. The cost had been high: 3 wounded crew, a ship scarred, and the system pushed to the absolute brink of annihilation. But the victory was absolute. They had not just saved a colony. They had confronted an entire civilization with the flaws in its soul, and through a demonstration of restraint and truth had convinced it to change. They came to punish. They stayed to learn. In the aftermath, a joint commission was formed. Adjudicator Cathar, far from being executed, became a key voice for reform within the vexation hierarchy, using his own unaltered logs as the primary evidence. The encounter at Epsilon Eridani was entered into the public record of both civilizations, not as a battle, but as the Eridani reflection. As a direct consequence, the Vexation High Command officially suspended the ultimatum doctrine, pending a full philosophical review. The Oakhaven Solar Mirrors, their brief critical role in galactic history, concluded. Swiveled back to their primary purpose, their vast surfaces cooling from pewter gray back to a brilliant sun-facing silver. Admiral Vance stood on her bridge watching the last of the Vexation ships prepare for their long, quiet journey home. She had been a soldier, a strategist, and a teacher. She had faced down 2 fleets and won without a war. Her victory was not measured in ships destroyed, but in a future rewritten. She had held up a mirror, and an entire civilization had finally been brave enough to look. True strength is not the will to enforce your truth, but the courage to expose it to the light and trust that others will see. We are the mirror. We are the ledger.